While we saw the Colombian army outsourcing many of the disreputable acts of its dirty war to the paramilitaries, here in the United States we also saw a similar phenomenon happen in the U.S. military. Under the Bush administration, the privatization of U.S. military operations has also intensified. Mercenary firms such as Blackwater and DynCorp fed on government contracts and grew fat and powerful under the protective wing of the government. These firms operated from the coca fields of Colombia to the streets of New Orleans and Fallujah and to prisons such as Abu Ghraib without any public oversight or accountability. They allowed the government to wage war with little regard for the rights of civilian non-combatants or prisoners of war, while simultaneously being able to deny any knowledge of or participation in human rights violations. And as Swedish journalist Staffan Lovering has noted, they have essentially become the empire's paramilitaries. So I think we're now faced with the question, will the Obama administration chart a new foreign policy in Latin America? And given the economic crisis now in the United States and the wars in the Middle East, it's unlikely that Latin America is going to be at the top of the administration's policy agenda. Yet to begin developing a new relationship with Latin America, the Obama administration must drop the Bush-era tactic of divide and conquer, accept that the upsurge of center-left governments in Latin America and their involvement in wealth distribution and control over basic resources isn't a threat to the United States, and understand that constitutional reforms to extend greater rights to indigenous peoples in places like Bolivia are not contrary to U.S. interests, basically just to allow Latin Americans to make their own decisions. But as I said at the beginning, I don't think the prospects for this look particularly good, unless Obama is really pushed from below. Obama and several major Democratic leaders support some of the failed policies of Bush, such as Plan Colombia, such as free trade, and such as the extension of the drug war and its militarization under Plan Mexico. Plan Mexico is also modeled on Plan Colombia and the same problematic war on drugs logic. It represents an opportunity for the U.S. to project its military influence into Mexico and Central America and use it as a platform against Cuba and Venezuela if it so chooses. This is because over half of the $1.5 billion aid package will go to Mexican military and police forces who are accused of extensive human rights crimes and, like in Colombia, operate with virtual impunity. Plan Mexico militarizes the drug war, it strengthens these unaccountable security forces, and it will also likely lead to an increase in paramilitary activity, as happened in Colombia. Paramilitaries in Mexico have already been linked to attacks on the Zapatistas. In 2006, paramilitary organizations in Oaxaca repressed indigenous and social movements there. It's likely that these legal mercenary firms that grew up under Bush will become more involved in fighting the drug war, both as a way to avoid the involvement of U.S. troops and as a way to avoid accountability. Militarizing the drug war in Mexico and Colombia is also likely to intensify repression against domestic political opposition, again, very similar to Colombia. I think this because the definition, again, of who counts as a security threat has been broadened to include migrant workers along with drug traffickers and terrorists, while ignoring both the demand of workers, the demand for workers in the United States and the root causes of migration. For example, the free trade policies that allow the United States to dump subsidized corn on Mexico and thus undercut peasant production and leave peasant households with no other way to make a living. And finally, Plan Mexico provides no money for drug treatment or harm reduction either in the United States or in Mexico. And the so-called cooperation package completely ignores problems that exist within the United States, such as the widespread entry and sale of drugs here, and cross-border gun running and money laundering. On the torture question, Obama has come through on a campaign pledge to close down Guantanamo, and he ordered the military to abide by the interrogation tactics outlined in the Army Field Manual. This was obviously a good first step, but then it was followed by Leon Panetta, Obama's pick for the CIA, leaving open the possibility that the agency would seek permission to use interrogation tactics that go beyond the new rules. So this is a mixed message here. Perhaps more to the point, however, to the extent that the administration is addressing the issue of torture, it's only doing so among a relatively small number of U.S. security forces who actually engage in torture. It leaves totally untouched the matter of those security forces that are trained and supported by the United States and that regularly engage in torture. I mean, the militaries of Colombia, Egypt, Israel, and Mexico come immediately to mind. I think Obama's initiative also, if it doesn't go far enough, reinforces the public perception that the United States only started condoning torture under the Bush administration, when, as the mainstream media has pointed out to us, after the 9/11 attacks, the CIA supposedly took off its gloves and rolled up its sleeves, and voila, torture was born in the U.S. military. We all know that this isn't true, but unless Obama and the new Congress are willing to close down notorious military training centers like the School of the Americas, Obama's initial moves I think, are only going to undergird the public amnesia that blurs the historical record, especially regarding Latin America, and leave unaccountable security forces around the world free to continue terrorizing people. This is why I think the movement to close the School of the Americas is so important. It's not only demanding the closure of a notorious training center, it's also a constant reminder to anyone who cares to listen that the U.S. military, that torture in the U.S. military didn't start after 9/11. It's been with us for a long time, a consistent state policy. And this is a direct challenge to deeply held beliefs about American exceptionalism. The notion that the U.S. is essentially good, and that because it is good, it only uses its power for virtuous ends. The presumed innocence that I think the whole idea of American exceptionalism embodies ensures that we are always the victims of the violence of others, and that any U.S. attack on us is always defensive. I have a graduate student who's a very smart guy, but recently declared in a class that I teach on political violence that, as long as we do it, it's okay. He's a diplomatic historian. So, this sort of perception about the U.S. always, acting out of benevolent motives is very deep-seated. I think the movement challenges this thinking in a whole lot of ways, most powerfully by privileging the lives of the victims of military atrocities and highlighting the violence of soldiers trained at the SOA, especially in the visual. In this way, it shows that torture and brutality have been a consistent part of U.S. policy for decades. I think by doing this, the movement is also keeping the boundaries around interpretations of U.S. policy in the Americas and indeed the world from closing too tightly and opening up spaces for more critical truths about it to emerge. So I think fighting this kind of public amnesia about torture is really now more important than ever, and making sure that we really push the Obama administration on this is important right now, and I think that there is much more of an opportunity today than there was under Bush. So thank you very much.